Welcome to the first part of a 4 or 5 part series on crypto market valuation. What the series is all about really is my understanding and my approach to market entry and exit within the crypto cycle for this current cycle. The series was developed for a group of friends and enthusiasts. We get together from time to time and we talk about cryptocurrency. So this was just really put together, to summarize thoughts and ideas that we've had as a group into something tangible that would hopefully allow us to make a little bit of money as we navigate these very volatile and uncertain times when it comes to cryptocurrency. So before I dive into the presentation, I'll have to do the standard disclaimer. This is not investment advice. This is analysis that's really presented for information only. It's important to note that cryptocurrency investing, is not risk-free. So if anybody undertakes this kind of endeavor, they do it with the full knowledge that you could lose your money. So any use of this information is purely at the user's own risk. Inside of this presentation, you're going to see some models. And if there's one thing that we can say about models is that they are all wrong, right? But sometimes they can be useful. So hopefully what we present here is of some use. Also, Aristotle once said that those who know do, but those that understand teach. I'd like to think that I know, but to test my own understanding, I'm attempting to teach. I may not be successful in that regard, but hopefully I'll learn something along the way, and maybe you'll pick up 1 or 2 nuggets too. The fundamental premise for the presentation is based on Bitcoin price behavior, okay? And what we're saying is where Bitcoin goes, all the altcoins will follow. We get to that conclusion based on looking at past price behavior in previous market cycles. Bitcoin tends to lead the market. When the market gets confidence in what Bitcoin is doing, that confidence then overflows into the altcoin market. Once the market begins to lose confidence in Bitcoin, what we tend to see then is a loss of confidence in the altcoins. Now, there's a lot of noise in between all of that, and sometimes Bitcoin will pump for a little bit, then the altcoins will pump for a little bit. Bitcoin might have a slight retracement, the alts might have a slight retracement, but as a grand narrative, for a particular market cycle, you will see where Bitcoin goes, that's where the altcoins follow. When Bitcoin then, for want of a better expression, crashes, the altcoins then crash soon afterwards. Okay, so it therefore then makes sense that we should probably try to understand what Bitcoin is going to do, and then sort of glean from that what we would anticipate the altcoin market doing. Okay, so how do we go about that? Well, we've broken this presentation up into 5 parts. The first part, which we'll be talking about in this section of the recording, will be what the broad valuation frameworks for the Bitcoin price will be, okay, or could be, right? And there are a number of different frameworks, there are a number of different views that we can sort of look at Bitcoin through, and we'll attempt to sort of summarize those. Once we've done that, we'll then move on to part 2, where we sort of trying to understand what we are likely to see in this market cycle based on our understanding of the valuation frameworks. Then we'll sort of zoom in a little bit and we'll look at Bitcoin indicators that will kind of help track whether our perception of what it's going to do this market is actually going to play out. And once we've got that well understood, and that will sort of guide us into Bitcoin entry and exit, we'll then look at altcoins and have come up with a view on a market sentiment indicator for altcoins that will be based on Bitcoin. And at the end of that, we'll put it all together to broadly outline a strategy for market entry and exit. Okay, good. So let's dive into the Bitcoin valuation scenario analysis. So what we've attempted to do here is try to look at potential Bitcoin futures with different broad narratives in mind that you might come across if you talk to different people within the market about their perceptions of Bitcoin. Now, what we've done is we've broken it up into 4 scenarios. You could break it up even further, but we found it helpful to consider it in sort of 4 broad scenarios. I think the other thing to add is that these scenarios are not necessarily mutually exclusive from each other. There is a certain amount of overlap that could exist. But anyway, hopefully this sort of gives you a picture of what the 4 broad scenarios are that we've tried to categorize Bitcoin in. So the first one is Bitcoin is tulips. This is the very skeptical view. Often the big critics of Bitcoin will use this as a little catchphrase. Really what they're saying is there's no intrinsic value in Bitcoin. The greater fool theory is at play, where the early adopters are waiting for the price to increase, and as soon as it gets to some kind of high level price target, they'll dump it on the rest of the market, and the rest of the market then will be sitting with bags of Bitcoin that would have been devalued. Hence, the greater fools. They see it as internet money, magic internet money that's not based on anything. And ultimately, their view is the long-term price of Bitcoin will tend to zero. The big proponents of this narrative is guys like Peter Schiff and the economists Paul Krugman and Nouriel Roubini. Okay, then you get Bitcoin is new money narrative. Here, the focus is on blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies in particular, where they should be optimized to act as the ultimate medium of exchange. And there, the key focus is to make sure that whatever cryptocurrency you use, the best one is the one that gives you the most transactions per second at the lowest cost. People who tend to push this narrative tend to be, tech-savvy individuals who want to become independent of central banks. Sometimes then this is also seen as kind of money for libertarians or kind of money for the masses, and it's the ultimate medium of exchange, as I said. Here, the long-term price for that kind of cryptocurrency will be $10,000 to $100,000. It's an order of magnitude estimate. The popular proponents of this narrative are guys like Roger Ver from Bitcoin Cash and Craig Stephen Wright and Calvin Ayre from Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, and there are others as well. Then there's Bitcoin is digital gold. Okay, and what the proponents of this narrative push is that we've essentially invented gold 2.0. So Bitcoin has all the properties of gold plus some additional ones that make it even better. That is, it's scarcer than gold, and it's much more easily transmittable. Okay, so you can move it around a lot easier than you can large amounts of gold. Here, the focus of Bitcoin will be on store of value first, and ultimately we will also move to a sort of broader medium of exchange as layer 2 scaling solutions get improved and adopted. The most popular one you would have heard of probably is the Lightning Network. This is also seen as money for libertarians, money for the tech savvy who also want to be independent of central banks. At the moment, I would say this is probably the scenario or the narrative that is gaining most traction. Okay, and increasingly we are seeing institutions, Wall Street, and famous investors all push this kind of narrative, right? So You may have heard of Grayscale. They're a large Bitcoin institution, investment institution, and then there are guys like Raoul Pal who kind of push this narrative. And there we're looking at and this is based on the market cap of gold. You're looking at a long-term price of somewhere between $300,000 and $1 million per Bitcoin. Then we get to Bitcoin as the global reserve asset. In this scenario, Bitcoin essentially becomes the world's monetary base. It gets used by nation states to back their national currencies. All large financial institutions, businesses, and local governments also maintain their treasuries in Bitcoin. And in essence, we get to this hyper-Bitcoinization event where it's just broadly adopted by the world. Okay, and the long-term price here is in excess of $10 million a Bitcoin. This is a view that gets popularized by all the Bitcoin maximalists, guys like Plan B, Max Kaiser, Seyfedin Ammous, and there's a whole raft of others who also push for this view. Okay, so how do people get to there from where Bitcoin is at the moment, right? I mean, to understand that, you have to sort of try and get a view of the playing field that Bitcoin is attempting to play in, and cryptocurrencies as a whole are attempting to play in. There's a very useful website called visualcapitalist.com. In that website, what they tend to do is graphically depict the market capitalization of different assets relative to each other. And I've just done a small snapshot here for you to kind of get a sense, right? And you'll see in the top left-hand corner, you can see silver and cryptocurrencies. They're represented as one block, and then different assets and different financial elements that pervade across the world. They represented there for you to do comparisons at, and you can see relative to, say, the stock market or Fortune 500 companies or the gold market, Bitcoin is tiny. The information is a little bit dated, but relative to the other classes, you can get a sense, and it carries on into derivatives, the money supply, and real estate, and you can see there's plenty of room really for Bitcoin to grow. So when we talk about Bitcoin growing to a market cap of, say, $1 million per coin, whatever the equivalent market cap of that would be, you can understand that this is the playing field that scenario is likely to play out in, and you can see then that it's a possibility. Okay, so let's look at each of the scenarios and try to kind of discern, a probability or a likelihood to that scenario playing out. So let's look at the first one. Bitcoin is tulips. If you look at the graph at the lower left, the black one, what we've got there is a representation of Bitcoin's price over time relative to other famous manias or bubbles, if you can call it that. Okay, and you can see the famous bubbles tend to have a very similar pattern. There's a mania phase where the price rises up, and then a complete loss in confidence and the price crashes down. Okay, so you can see the tulip bubble there, famous, the famous one. There's also the South Sea Company bubble, and then the dot-com bubble that happened more recently. And relative to those, the price behavior of Bitcoin is very different. Okay, firstly, Bitcoin, has a longer life, and maybe a little bit tongue-in-cheek. If it's really a bubble, why does the price keep crashing upwards? Okay, so the notion of Bitcoin being a single bubble event is probably not correct. One of the famous cypherpunks and early adopters of Bitcoin, in fact, Hal Finney was noted to be the first person to have received a Bitcoin transfer from Satoshi Nakamoto. He famously quoted in 2011 that every day that goes by and Bitcoin hasn't collapsed due to legal or technical problems, that brings new information to the market. It increases the chance of Bitcoin's eventual success and justifies its higher price. So the longer Bitcoin stays alive, the more likely it is to succeed. Okay, then let's look at the next scenario, Bitcoin as new money. In the last cycle, Bitcoin fought quite a few battles. They're known as the forking wars, where Bitcoin Cash and after that Bitcoin Satoshi Vision sort of forked away from Bitcoin. And there was a lot of concern at that time that Bitcoin as it's currently in its current iteration may not succeed, right? That it would actually be overtaken by inverted commas better technology. Okay, there were also a whole raft of clones that were created from Bitcoin when Bitcoin was first released, and lately there's also been newer technologies such as XRP or Digibyte, all which give you much faster transactions per second at a lower cost. So then you would expect that these coins would dominate and overtake Bitcoin in terms of market capitalization. That's simply not happened. Okay, up until now, the market has voted overwhelmingly for store of value first, transactions per second second. Okay, so what we're saying here is that any cryptocurrency needs to have a robust monetary policy that guarantees store of value. Okay, and by store of value, that's encapsulated by it being decentralized, censorship resistant. I should have a proof of work protocol and a fixed monetary policy. So any cryptocurrency that hopes to compete with Bitcoin needs to be able to do all of that, or it won't be able to overtake Bitcoin, right? So with that assumption in mind, we can therefore say that the long-term view for all these altcoin cryptocurrencies is likely that they will tend to zero, and that makes that argument. Okay, so now let's move on to digital gold. This is what we're seeing this market cycle. It's recently been all over the news. A number of famous Wall Street investors have come out in support of Bitcoin, famously toward the middle to back end of last year. We even had a company, MicroStrategy, convert a large proportion of its corporate treasury from fiat currency into Bitcoin. Okay, this sent shockwaves through the industry. We've got the likes of PayPal now transacting in Bitcoin. Fierce critics, banks like JP Morgan, who have been in the past quite disparaging of Bitcoin, have now changed their tune. So this clearly seems to be the dominant narrative for Bitcoin at the moment. And then the last one that I'd like to touch on is Bitcoin as a global reserve asset. Now, in order for this to succeed, we are talking about nation states having to adopt Bitcoin as a form of currency or a form of store of value that would therefore then back their national currencies. And for that to happen, Bitcoin has to overcome quite a wall of skepticism, and even, I would say, outright aggression towards its very survival. That might sound a bit hyperbolic, but if you look at what gets reported in the news from time to time, recently the European Central Bank chief, Christine Lagarde, came out calling for more Bitcoin regulation, saying that Bitcoin is used for funny business. You hear often, countries like China, more recently India, coming out, sort of wanting to ban Bitcoin and not allow it to be used for transactions with their financial institutions locally. So there is a reasonable amount of skepticism by the major international financial institutions when it comes to Bitcoin. And if, as I said, if it hopes to overcome take its place as a global reserve asset, it would have to overcome this perception. Okay, so in the medium to long term, where's Bitcoin likely to go? Okay, now you'll see some likelihood percentages at the bottom there. This is purely anecdotal. They've not been mathematically calculated. It's just my view of where I think it's likely to go, and the percentages are there as a guide. Okay. So the first one is Bitcoin as tulips. Okay. This is an unlikely scenario, but it's not impossible. Okay. The reason why I say that is, although Bitcoin has been around for well over 10 years, it's climbed a lot of walls of skepticism. And it's starting to receive widespread adoption now, even with financial institutions. All of this bodes well for Bitcoin, but that does not account for all risks that are currently there for Bitcoin. And there are known risks, such as a global anti-Bitcoin consensus, and there are unknown risks, right? So-called black swans that may come out, and they could scupper this whole project. Okay, I view these risks as unlikely of materializing in the medium term, but to say that it's just simply won't happen is not prudent. Okay, then Bitcoin as new money. As I said before, Bitcoin has established itself as the dominant cryptocurrency. Okay, when compared to Bitcoin Cash or BSV, really there's no competition. There are other newer, smaller players as well, but they failed to, thus far anyway, take the front row seat from Bitcoin. Okay, but that being said, it's not completely inconceivable that a cryptocurrency could come along that could grow its network at a rate faster than what Bitcoin is growing, okay, and sustain that growth rate. If that happens and the network does become bigger than Bitcoin's network, there is a possibility that cryptocurrency then could take the front row position. Okay, again, I think this is very unlikely. Bitcoin is not a static thing. Bitcoin continues to be developed, and there's been incredible advances recently in the layer 2 scaling solutions, like the Lightning Network. The Bitcoin Core protocol has also undergone some recent changes that received consensus agreement across the entire network. So the future for Bitcoin looks very bright. And then comparing that to what we currently see in the market, currencies like XRP, and as I mentioned, Bitcoin Cash and BSV, they remain small players and are likely to remain so, in my opinion. The digital gold narrative is the popular narrative, and I think in the medium term, this is the one that we are most likely to see play out. Okay, I don't think it will be a straight line up. I think probably we will see some setbacks, but overall, the momentum is now behind Bitcoin, with Wall Street and international financial institutions adopting Bitcoin. It creates a social political pressure to switch the skeptical view of Bitcoin to something that is more positive. Okay, and as I said, for that reason, I believe the momentum is now with Bitcoin for us to realize the digital gold outcome in the medium term. What about Bitcoin as a global reserve asset? I think it's unlikely that nation states are likely to cede control of their monetary issuance systems without being forced to or heavily incentivized to do so. We may start to see smaller countries in emerging markets that have very volatile national currencies, take a bet on Bitcoin. Okay, and that could start to turn the tide, and that could start to see Bitcoin, starting to take this global reserve asset position. But overall, there's going to be a lot of skepticism and a lot of animosity amongst the powerful governments in the world that Bitcoin will have to overcome. If I can get a little bit philosophical, Bitcoin is a revolutionary invention, okay, and it can almost be likened to the discoveries of Copernicus and Galileo, right? Where up until their time, the dominant view, which was pervaded by the church, was that the Earth was at the center of the universe and everything revolved around the Earth. Copernicus and after him Galileo came along, and they scientifically proved that to be not true. Now, that discovery wasn't immediately adopted, and the early adopters of that view faced a lot of persecution, but ultimately, the science prevailed. I think for Bitcoin to evolve into a global reserve asset, it will take some time for the science of Bitcoin to prevail. And in the meantime, it's likely that the early adopters, people who truly believe that it should become the global reserve asset, will likely face some persecution. So these are the four scenarios. I hope that you found this interesting. It gives you a little bit of context now as we start to dive into what will happen with Bitcoin price. And the price discussion is all going to be centered around this narrative of it being digital gold in the medium term. So we'll see you at the next session, and hope you found this interesting.